Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Today's story is about Joseph, found in Genesis 37 through 38. If you've ever been hurt by the things that people have said to you, this story may be for you. If you've ever been bullied, this story may be for you. If you've ever had your body hurt in a way that you know it shouldn't have been hurt, then this story may be for you. The story starts out with Joseph, and he's 17 years old. He's one of many children, next to the youngest. His younger brother is Benjamin, and he and Benjamin are of the same mother and father. So Jacob is his father, and Jacob loved Joseph so much. And this made his brothers very jealous that he was loved so much by Jacob. And things happened that made them very angry about Joseph. One thing was the father made a coat of many colors and gave it to Joseph, and that kind of made them angry. And then Joseph had a dream, and I think this was the beginning of God's gift to him of interpreting dreams. He had a dream that his brothers would bow down to him, and his brothers got so angry about that. And this is where the anger led them. So the story goes that the brothers were in the field taking care of the animals, having them eat the grass of the field so they could live. And Jacob, Joseph's father, was concerned about them and the animals. So he said, Joseph, go find them, make sure that the brothers are okay and that the animals are okay. So Joseph went out to find them. When the brothers saw him coming, their anger got so big against Joseph because of their jealousy. And it led them to places that were evil and to thoughts that were wrong. They plotted to kill him because they just didn't want him around anymore. But they decided that that would be bad, that they shouldn't do that, because then, of course, killing him would be their fault forever. And they decided, well, there's a pit over there that, he can't get out of. Let's put him in the pit. So all the brothers said, yeah, let's put him in the pit. So they put him in this big hole where he couldn't get out of. And they saw some people far off that they trade things, like they have things that they will trade for like food or things that they need. They said, let's sell them to him, to those people. So Reuben went to get him. He wasn't in the hole anymore. He was so upset. He didn't know where he was or how to find him. But what they didn't know is that the men had already gotten Joseph out of that pit and had decided to sell him themselves. So they go into Egypt, and they come upon it's like the highest security guard for Pharaoh. Pharaoh, he was like a king. He was like our president of the United States. And they sold Joseph to the security guard. Joseph was being watched over by God. God knew that he was a good person and that these things shouldn't have been happening to him, and God was taking care of him. So he was put over the household of this security guard, and he took very good care of everything, of the house, of the land, everything. He took good care of. And it just got better and better under Joseph's command. So this security guard, he had a wife, and she began to think bad things about Joseph, and she wanted him to do bad things with her. But Joseph says, no, I can't do this. Your husband, he's taken so good care of me, and I can't do this bad thing to him. And so Joseph left. But what happened is that she got mad because he refused her. Because he would not do something bad, she got mad. And she decided that she would tell her husband that indeed Joseph had done this bad thing. So she tells her husband that he's done something bad to her. And he was angry. He says, I've given him so much, but what I did not give him is you. And he was so angry. So he put Joseph in a prison. But even in prison, the prison guards, they knew that Joseph was good. that he did no wrong. And they knew that he was watched over by God. So what they did is they put him over the other prisoners, which was a very important position because they trusted him. So along the way, there were two prisoners that had actually worked for Pharaoh, remember the king of Egypt, and they had a dream. And you know, God had given Joseph a gift of interpreting dreams. So Joseph told them their dreams and what they meant. And he said, look, when you go back to Pharaoh, tell him about me and get me out of this prison. So eventually they went back to Pharaoh, and you know, they forgot about Joseph, right? They just forgot all about him. They didn't tell Pharaoh anything about him. But in the meantime, the dreams that he had interpreted indeed came true. Later on, Pharaoh also had a dream that he said, I need to know what this dream means. Pharaoh had many people around him that weren't Christians, that did not believe in God. These people tried to interpret the dream, but they couldn't interpret it because the dream was from God, and only a man of God could interpret it for Pharaoh. Later, the one man who was a baker said, oh, you know, this man, when I was in prison, he told me what my dream meant. Maybe he can do that for you. So Pharaoh said, go get him. So they went and got Joseph, and they brought him to Pharaoh. And indeed, he interpreted the dream for Pharaoh. Pharaoh was amazed. Pharaoh knew that he was the wisest man he had ever met, and that he was watched over by God. Pharaoh said, I'm going to make this man in control of all my land. So he became in control of all the land of Egypt. And for the next 7 years, the land was prosperous, and Joseph made sure that the extra food was put away for another time. So years later, a famine occurred, which is when there's no rain to feed the plants, no rain to make grass for the animals to feed. And Canaan was very, very bad off. They had no food. So Jacob, Joseph's father, said, you know, I've heard there's corn to be bought in Egypt. So he says, go to Egypt. So he sent all of his sons to Egypt with money to buy corn. So when they got to Egypt, Joseph saw them, and he was so overwhelmed with emotion. He went and he cried and away from there where he didn't see, and he came back. And what they wanted to do was buy corn. So Joseph thought, remember, he's very wise. He's not going to hurt his family at all for what they've done. What he's done is he wants to hear about his brother and his father. So he asks them questions, and they tell him about the father and about about Benjamin. And he says, you know, I don't know to believe you. Maybe you're spies. Maybe you're lying to me. I don't know. Maybe this is all a story. He says, I want you to go back, and I want you to bring Benjamin back with you so I can know that you're telling the truth. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep one of the brothers here with me. So he filled their bags with corn, and they went off to go back home with the food. When they got part way, they opened the bags up, and the money was there too. All the corn and all their money. Now they worried. They said, you know, something's wrong. This is happening because of what we did to Joseph. There's something wrong here. But they went on home, and they told their father Jacob about what Joseph had requested, that they come back with Benjamin. But the father said, no, you know, Joseph is gone. I can't lose Benjamin too. And now Benjamin, of course, was his youngest son. So things stayed the same. They ate the corn. And later, when all the corn was almost gone, and they needed, and still there was a famine, and it was getting worse, and there was no food, Jacob said, well, you need to go back to Egypt, but this time you're going to take double the money. You're going to pay him back the money that you brought back, and you would take more money to buy more food, more corn, and take some gifts also to give him. But they said, Father, you know that he's not going to let us get it, the corn, without bringing Benjamin. So finally the father agreed, but he said, oh, you're in so much trouble if something happens to Benjamin. But Reuben, the oldest brother, said, this is on me if something happens to him. I'll take the blame. So they went back to Egypt, and they came before Joseph. And when Joseph saw his brother, Benjamin, again, he was overwhelmed to see his brother. So he went off. He cried. He came back. He said that he wanted them to eat with him. So they all went to his house, and they were given food to eat. And Joseph's plan was to give them all the corn they needed and all the money back. But then Joseph was overwhelmed, and he couldn't keep the secret anymore. And he told them, he said, I am your brother Joseph. I am alive. They were overwhelmed. They couldn't believe it. They had nothing to say. They didn't know what to say. I'm sure they were a little fearful because he was in such control. And indeed, they had bowed down to him. And they were probably scared of what he was going to do. But Joseph, he just wanted his family, right? He wanted his brother. He wanted his father. He knew the famine was very bad and that they would die without help. So he said to them, I want you to go back. I want you to get father and bring him back. Bring all your family back and all your cattle, everything that you own. So Joseph sent them back with wagons, with lots of food, lots of money, and everything they needed to be able to come back to Egypt. So they went back, and indeed the father agreed, and they all came back to Egypt. And this was what's so special, is that he asked Pharaoh to send them to the land that was prosperous, a land where the cattle could eat, and Joseph took care of them. He didn't hurt them. He didn't try to do anything to them. He took care of them, and he loved them because he had his father and his brothers all together again. So this is some of the things I'd like for you to think about. One thing is, Joseph didn't have a way to tell anyone what had happened to him, how that his brothers had hurt him in his heart and tried to hurt him physically. He didn't have anyone to tell. They didn't have telephones. They didn't have email accounts. They didn't have Skype or FaceTime. So Joseph, even though his brothers meant something very bad for him, God watched over him, and he prayed to God, and God took care of him, even though he couldn't speak. But what's different between today and then is you have someone you can tell. If you're being hurt by the words people say to you, if you're being bullied, if you're being touched physically in a way that you should not be touched and you're hurt physically, your body is hurt, I want you to tell someone. You can tell your mom. You can tell your dad. You could tell your grandmother, your grandfather. You could tell your teacher, your preacher, or a policeman. But tell someone, because these things should not be happening to you. And today, someone can help you. The thing I want to tell you also is what happened with Joseph. He was hurt, but God watched over him. He believed in Jesus. He believed in God and that God would take care of him. And God watched him as he went through these things. Joseph never owned his own house. He never owned his own land. He was always working for someone else. But God loved him, and God took care of him. And he took what his brothers meant for evil, and God had a different plan. He knew that Joseph would have to save his family one day, and so he led him to a place where he could save his family from death. Please, trust in Jesus. If you're having a hard time, pray to God. He'll take care of you. He'll watch over you. He'll give you answers. He can fight the fight for you. But most important of all, tell someone about the problems that are happening to you, the things that are happening to you, so they can help you. And pray to God, because He will always be with you. Remember, God loves you. It says in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son," that was Jesus, "that whosoever believeth in Him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." God has forgiven us for our sins. He did that because He sent Jesus to pay for them. And when we believe, He forgives us. Please, find a way to forgive those who have hurt you. Because what happens when you have bad thoughts about people is that it does hurt you like it did the brothers. It hurt them in the end. Because they had such evil thoughts. They wanted to do bad to other people, to Joseph and to other people. Please learn to forgive. Do the right thing. God is always with you. Goodbye.